This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based.
In his inaugural address in 2025, the new president announced he would be dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. This sweeping policy has been a major blow to medicine, as billions of dollars in research grants have been cut and countless medical studies have been shuttered. The federal government's ban on DEI has angered a lot of people. And recently on Capitol Hill, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., faced questions from lawmakers. Here's Congresswoman Summer Lee of Pennsylvania.
Your agency told programs to remove a list of nearly 200 words and phrases from their funding applications, including the word Black. Do you have an idea of how we could solve the Black maternal mortality crisis if we can't say Black?
President Trump is trying to end division in this country, not division.
Not eviction.
During the last 4 years. That's what DEI did. It divided people. It polarized people.
No. We're not talking about eviction. We're talking about healthcare.
I'm calling about DEI.
We're talking about healthcare.
This is The Race Equation, a special series from the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm Rachel Gottbaum. In this series, we've investigated how race has been misused in diagnosis and treatment, and how it continues to harm Black patients. We've told the stories of doctors and medical students fighting to reverse these long-held practices and remove racist myths from science. But now, their efforts are in jeopardy. So what does this mean for medicine? And what does it mean for patients? To help answer these questions, I'm joined by Dr. Kemi Dahl, a gynecologic oncologist at the University of Washington Medical School, and Dr. William McDade, an anesthesiologist at Rush University and former Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
So I'd like to start by hearing a bit about your personal journeys. Dr. McDade, why did you decide to go into medicine?
I graduated from high school pretty early and went on to college very early and was probably going to pursue a career as just a PhD scientist. And then I had the great occasion to be in conversation with an endocrinologist at the University of Chicago who said, why don't you study problems that actually impact the health of humans? And that's how I ended up in medicine. The thing that I noticed is that I was the only African-American student in my first-year class. I thought, I see African-Americans walking around campus at the University of Chicago. It's on the south side of Chicago, but nobody in a white coat was African-American. And the need to increase the diversity of folks who looked like me in my communities was really the bigger impetus once I got to medical school and realized how few there were.
So, Dr. Dahl, why did you decide to become an oncologist? What happened for you?
My mother was a nurse. She worked on labor and delivery unit for decades. Sometimes I would need to go with her to night shifts because she didn't have anybody to care for us overnight. So I kind of grew up in some ways in the hospital and around healthcare. And so I saw the doctors walking around in their coats, and that felt really exciting and inspiring to me. And when I was in my residency and I started caring for women affected by uterine cancer, cervical cancer, I just realized that it brought together everything that I was so passionate about. Women's healthcare, important diseases that were life-altering or life-changing in some way, a patient-doctor relationship that really mattered in terms of being able to get somebody the care they wanted, and then a holistic approach, because in gynecologic oncology, we both do the surgery and we administer the chemotherapy. And so it felt like a very holistic way to take care of patients.
So why did you decide to focus on Black women?
I think like many medical students, my experience was one of learning about diseases and almost inevitably learning about how they were worse among Black populations. Black people either got the diseases more, they were more severe, they did worse with the outcomes. It was so common that it just felt like another fact. And frankly, it wasn't something that I interrogated that much. My framework around Black people were just that Black people's bodies were broken. And so it was when I was in residency that I started to question whether that narrative was accurate. I mean, I saw women who were coming in for a routine pap smear and contraception with severe anemia, hemoglobin levels of 4. And when you see that in the hospital, it would cause an alarm for transfusion. But I saw Black women from the south side of Chicago, because I was at Cook County Hospital and Northwestern, walking around, working at those levels. I thought, okay, this is not an example of people who are broken. The way that we look at their bodies, the way that we treat them, the way that we do the research, how we answer questions is broken. But actually, these women are incredibly strong, and we have the wrong lens. And that's really what led me to start looking at Black women specifically with regard to how we think about gynecologic disease and gynecologic cancers.
So tell us a little more about that, about your research and why it's been important.
In uterine cancer or endometrial cancer, there's a cardinal symptom, which is postmenopausal bleeding. We have very, very clear algorithms in gynecology of what you do when that happens, how you work that up. Our algorithm says that you do an ultrasound, you measure the endometrial thickness, and if it's less than 4 millimeters, then that person has a 99 to 100% negative predictive value of having an endometrial cancer. In essence, you can avoid doing an endometrial biopsy because in population level studies, you don't see endometrial cancers under that threshold. However, my research kept consistently showing that Black women were diagnosed with later stage uterine cancers consistently. And what I was taught was that that was because we get more aggressive disease. But the studies upon which our guidelines were based and these thresholds were based did not include Black women. Black women have an 80% prevalence of fibroids. So what was happening is that Black women would get ultrasounds and their readings would suggest no risk of cancer because either the lining reading was incorrect or they didn't actually locate the lesion of interest because of intervening fibroids, and there was false reassurance. So my research showed that 10% of Black women with endometrial cancers were being falsely reassured that they did not have it. They were not getting biopsies, leading to more advanced stage diagnosis. And just this past month, ACOG, our professional organization, has updated the guidelines based on that research and those of other groups that replicated the same findings so that we can start to adjust this. But it is a perfect example of what happens when you design clinical algorithms or do research and you don't require a diverse sample. You don't require the inclusivity of those doing the worst with the condition. It will lead us to make clinical algorithms that have racism baked into them.
You research gynecologic cancers in Black women, but you believe this work helps all women. How?
Yeah, I mean, Black women have had high rates of what we call the type 2 or aggressive types of endometrial cancer because we have not studied Black women and this cancer type. Now in 2026, as we see these type 2 aggressive uterine cancers rising across all populations, we are behind the 8 ball in how to treat them. We don't understand them. We are scrambling to catch up, and it is hurting us because the uterine cancer mortality rate is skyrocketing. It's a perfect example of if we had focused on Black women and endometrial cancer, we would be helping everyone right now. So scientifically, I have never understood the idea of excluding populations. I have never understood the idea of devaluing equity work or disparities work because it is such a rich vault of knowledge that helps everyone.
So let's dig into that a little more. Dr. McDade, equity work and physician training has been your primary focus. So what's been the impact so far of the ban on DEI?
Well, the initial problem, of course, was that institutions funded by NIH were threatened with loss of federal contracts for engaging in inappropriate use of diversity, equity, inclusion, otherwise known as DEI. When that happened, there were algorithms that picked out certain words in those grants. There were about 200 different words that would trigger your grant for special review. For instance, the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities had 77 grants that out of 864 that were terminated.
So what are some of the words that trigger a review of the grants?
Some are very basic, such as race, Black, Hispanic, diversity, inclusion, these sorts of words that were in typical grants that would allow you to actually look at subjects that were important. So what you found when you looked at who got their grants terminated, by and large, they were younger investigators, people who were at the assistant professor, research level, certainly the fellow level. And so if you get rid of the people who are doing research, and if you underfund the research itself, then it doesn't get studied. And if it doesn't get studied, then outcomes like Dr. Dahl just mentioned are what occurs, that people suffer disproportionately with respect to race and ethnicity.
So for those early stage investigators to lose this funding and then be told these are not areas of interest for the NIH going forward, you have to pivot. You have now cut off the careers of some of our brightest. So we don't know what they would have found in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. I don't know if we appreciate the level of loss the scientific community has now taken in because of this and how much we will need to work to repair and restore it when we're on the other side.
I want to talk about how the current administration has targeted accreditation agencies for medical schools and residency programs, like the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, ACGME. So, Dr. McDade, you created its Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Why did you do that, and what was needed there?
When I was a kid, I went to an ophthalmologist. You'd have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning because if you weren't one of the first 50 people in line, you didn't get seen that day. You had to bring a lunch with you because you didn't know how long you were going to stay. So we packed a lunch and went to the ophthalmologist early in the morning and stood in line outside the building before it opened. And then we finally got a chance to be seen. That's not how care should be delivered. That's not what I call access to care. But this is how we had to perform on the south side of Chicago to see an ophthalmologist who looked like us, who we had trust in, who was African American. When I started at ACGME in 2019, there were only 34 African Americans in the entire country in all the residency programs and all the years of training in ophthalmology. By the time I left 6 years later, they were up to now 87 residents from 34. It may not sound like a numerical difference that's all that large, but when you consider how few there were, the paucity of Black ophthalmologists in this country, now that's a huge difference.
So eventually the ACGME, which accredits residency and fellowship programs, was forced to shut down your office. What happened?
So on the inaugural day, there were a series of executive orders that were signed. About 9 o'clock that evening, one was signed that suggested there was going to be an elimination of DEI throughout the federal government and that there was going to be an extension of this elimination into the private sector as well. And so one of the things that came a few months later was an actual executive order that said that organizations that accredit cannot use illegal DEI and discrimination. So they named the LCME, the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, which accredits medical schools, and they named the ACGME. Then there were some state laws that changed. And one particular one in Arkansas actually said that you cannot get funding as an institution in the state unless you remove illegal DEI and discriminatory activities. At that point, the Liaison Committee on Medical Education said, we're going to take down our requirement. It said that medical schools needed to engage in outreach and development of a diverse pool of medical students. At that time, the ACGME said, well, we're not going to remove our requirement to do this. What we're going to do is just put it on hold. And so later that summer, there was a release from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, and it had a special paragraph in it and said that no accreditor can require illegal DEI or discrimination in its training programs. And so with these threats coming on a regular basis, the ACGME then dissolved its Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It ended its requirements to teach about health disparities, to teach about social determinants of health. This is important for us to be able to deliver excellent care to patients, but now they've removed that so that there is no requirement at all regarding health disparities education, around diversity, equity, inclusion in undergraduate now and in graduate medical education.
So what exactly are we losing here?
After the executive order that was signed in January, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights sent out a Dear Colleague letter that said the Supreme Court decision that limited affirmative action in admissions is now generally applicable to all activities in higher education. That, in fact, you couldn't have programs that were targeted to underrepresented individuals, that were focused on trying to enhance and enrich the education of individuals that was focused on race and ethnicity. Offices were closed around the country. And so that means that you've lost generational information about how to develop these pathway programs. You've lost the ability to try to bring younger people through in a graduated fashion. Once you target somebody in 8th grade, you get them to do algebra, you get them in a summer experience. Now you've got to figure out what you do in 9th grade, in 10th grade, in 11th grade. And all those programs that you would have had those students engage in have now withered away. And that's the tragedy of all this. National programs and grants to try to increase STEM education, those have been eliminated.
I wouldn't be here without those pipeline programs. I personally was able to do at that time what was called the Minority Medical Education Program, MMEP. I did that program as a college student over the summer. I did the program at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City. And it was the moment where I realized I can really do this. I ended up gaining admission to Columbia because they had the Office of Diversity responsible for reviewing every single application that came from a minoritized student. Otherwise, I would not have gained admission. And I graduated at the top of my class. By the standards, I would have been deemed not strong enough to even enter into the school. And yet, when I graduated, I received so many honors. There were chuckles in the audience because it's like, here she goes again to get the top student of this, to get the top pharmacology award, to get the top woman graduation GPA award. So I just feel so passionately about this because it is really a misnomer, this idea that what we're doing is somehow giving out charity. We are trying to break down the significant barriers that exist for brilliant, amazing minoritized students to be able to follow a pathway so that they can be physicians, scientists, and ultimately improve the health of everyone. I am a personal product of these pipeline programs, and it is absolutely devastating to lose them.
Well, Dr. Dahl, I just want to add to that. I used to be the principal investigator for the Chicago program.
Oh my goodness!
For the Minority Medical Enrichment Program. That program has been responsible for so many fantastic opportunities for young people to get into the medical and biomedical sciences. Unfortunately, that program has just ended this year. So there will be no further classes.
I just, sometimes I think we forget these programs are the reason why you see many of us today.
So if ultimately there are fewer doctors of color, how does that impact patients?
Well, we disproportionately, as African-American physicians, see African-American patients. And the opportunity to have a physician who looks like you, how that increases trust, how that increases adherence to medical advice. I see it on a regular basis in my own clinical activities where a patient was denying a procedure that was going to be very helpful to them because they didn't believe the system was going to function for them. So I go in the room and they're African-American and I talk to them a bit. And all of a sudden, they change their minds. They develop increased confidence because there's somebody who looks like them, who they may believe has their best interest at heart. And it's really hard to imagine that a system that denies you so many other opportunities is now going to somehow be fair to you in this certain environment, because race does play such an important role in society at large.
Absolutely. So the question is, are we interested in healthcare for the most privileged elite with all of the best benefits and setup in the society? Or are we interested in healthcare that includes everybody regardless of their background? And so the idea that when we are removing these programs, when we're getting rid of them, it tells me that as a country, we are wanting to design a healthcare system for the very, very, very few. And that should scare everybody. That should give everyone pause.
So in our reporting, we've encountered a climate of fear among researchers, among doctors of color, doctors who are studying or trying to study scientific disparities. What is this climate of fear doing to the medical field in your view?
Well, I think that the climate of fear is diluting opportunity for study in areas that needs to be done. If people don't feel they can say Black, they try to masquerade it in some sort of way You find surrogates or substitutes that you could use in order to get the work done, which means things aren't as exact. They're not as precise. In a conversation with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, a congressman asked, well, how can you study Black maternal health if you can't say Black? Well, his response was, we're going to improve maternal health outcomes for all women.
We are doing more on maternal health than any other administration.
No, I said Black maternal health.
On maternal health.
Black maternal health.
That includes Blacks and whites.
But the thing is that they're actually
Well,
not the same
that's a
outcome.
lovely idea, but if you can't figure out how the people who have a 3.5 to 4-fold mortality rate in maternity can improve their health care, it's going to be harder for you to improve the health care for all women.
This is the first time that I have really felt like I've been in an environment where leadership in scientific circles is somehow saying we need to be less specific. That has never been a scientific concept. So I think that the impact is profound. We truly are not going to continue to make progress in the way that we need to for these communities who deserve it, and also for the scientific endeavor as a whole, if we hamper ourselves with non-scientific ideological boundaries that have no scientific rationale. It just cannot be how we are going to advance.
So what do you all say to the critics who say, we were over-focused? Our previous focus on DEI had gone too far. In a nutshell, what would you say to that?
Well, DEI has never been the focus of society at large.
Ever.
During the most tumultuous times after the murder of George Floyd, people stepped back and said, well, maybe there is a point to understanding this and to try to work for inclusion. But that's now evaporated. There's been a backlash from that activity and a backsliding from the ideas that we're trying to seek an equitable outcome for all of the folks in our society. When I look at the damage that's been done, and that's what I say, it's an onslaught. It was the Supreme Court decision, which limited race-conscious admissions in higher education. Medical school enrollment for Blacks has dropped 25% in the last 5 years. So that one push from the Supreme Court has now changed the environment entirely for who gets into medical school. And so what we have to do is learn to say, we're going to stand up against it. A lot of these things that went forward from the executive branch have been challenged in court, and very few have actually been held up as being lawful. The pushback is actually effective, and we have to keep doing that and not be afraid of the consequences. And that's unfortunately not our institutes of higher education, because they have other missions. And so if they go down because of DEI, is that the sword they want to fall on? I think to some extent, if you start saying no to the DEI efforts, nothing else really matters because you'll cave on almost anything.
I agree fully. I worry that the institutional response that says that, well, we can lose DEI because that will keep our doors open. I sincerely worry about that kind of thinking, because it just shows that you are willing to do things that are the antithesis of the mission to improve the health of all. And nothing is really sacred at that point. To your question about the people who say that we've gone too far, as a person oriented towards science, I would ask, by what metric? These groups are called underrepresented because numerically, based on the population, we are vastly underrepresented in medicine. We are vastly underrepresented as scientists and as researchers. So what metric are we using to say that we've gone too far? I think the only metric might be that we simply are talking about this, but talking is not action. And so I just refuse to entertain such a proposition because it's not evidence-based. And I would be happy to have that conversation when we have the data that shows that we no longer have a 3.5 to 4 times Black maternal mortality rate compared to others, when Black women are surviving uterine cancer at the same rates, when we have population equivalent levels of Black and Latina and other underrepresented groups in medicine. When we actually can show that we have equity across the board, then we can have a conversation about to what extent do we need to continue. Before that point, it is an theoretical and it is a non-evidence-based conversation.
So what needs to happen? What now?
I think medical schools in general, residency programs particularly, have to understand that diversity is still important, have to understand that the communities are different and you may have to teach differently about those communities in order to try to give them the best possible care. You have to take into account those things that may not be medical necessarily, that may deal with the social determinants or structural determinants of health that play a gigantic role in healthcare outcomes. You can't give up on that simply because there's no longer a requirement that says that you have to do it. I also think that you have to set up missions for your institutions that say that it's important to take care of all people, to disabuse the idea that you only need to take care of the wealthy or the privileged in order to do no harm. You don't want to break the law, clearly, but if the law is not in accordance with logic and with justice, then you have to do something that pushes the line and drive the agenda to take us back to a situation that's going to lead to more equity.
Yeah, I'm going to speak directly to the minoritized scientists here, the minoritized clinician scientists, the folks that are feeling like, why should I keep going? It doesn't seem like there's any interest in this work. I can't build a career this way. I want to tell them that we come from people who persevered. And this is not the first time that our community at large has been under attack. And the thing we have to remember is that the entire point of these attacks is for us to leave. The point is for us to give up. The point is for us to disappear. And what I know about us is that we are able to build community to support each other to weather this storm. I want people to understand that your research ideas are still important. I want them to think about non-federal sources of funding during this time. And I want those who are in positions of power, those who do have funding, those who do have privilege, those who do have connections, to recognize what you can do is take an active role in ensuring that the clinician scientists in your arena that you know are well supported. Have you thought about how you can move your dollars to support the scholar whose grant was terminated? How can you leverage your connections that you might have to people who can support them in order to help them through? This will not be the end. We will weather this storm, but we must keep our scientists in the game because we need that for our society. We need that for our health, and it is worth it to stay in.
Thank you both so very much.
Thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
That was Dr. Kemi Dahl, a gynecologic oncologist at the University of Washington Medical School, and Dr. William McDade, an anesthesiologist at Rush University and former Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the ACGME. This is the final episode of The Race Equation, a special series from the New England Journal of Medicine. You can hear all the episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. The Race Equation is reported by me, Rachel Gottbaum. Our senior producer is Catherine Fenolosa. Our editor is Sarah Kate Kramer. Sound design by James Trout. Andrea Lopez Cruzado is our fact checker. We had help from Dr. Aaron Baugh, Dr. Winfred Williams, Dr. Eric Rubin, Christine Gwynn, Mary Birmingham, Adam Strauss, Allison Burke, Seema Ahusha, and Leocadia Marchwinski. Funding for the series is provided by the Doris Duke Foundation, committed to building a creative, equitable, and sustainable future.